We've got breaking news to bring you this hour concerning Canada's auto sector. General Motors is dropping electric van production at its plant near London, Ontario.
Across Canada this week, a quiet shock spread through the industrial heartland. In less than 7 days, two of the country's largest auto employers, General Motors and Stellantis, announced that they were scaling back or pulling production from Ontario. First came Stellantis moving its Jeep Compass line to Illinois. Then General Motors confirmed that it would halt production of its Bright Drop electric vans at the Cami assembly plant in Ingersoll, cutting roughly 200 jobs. For many, it felt like a heavy blow to a nation that helped build the North American auto industry. These plants were not just workplaces. They were symbols of a country that earned its place through skill, fairness, and persistence. Yet when the layoffs hit, the response from Canada was not rage. It was resilience.
How the Prime Minister how he will deal with the auto sector. He will look at the auto workers in the eyes and he will say, we will fight for your job.
Canada built cars, steel, and trust. And now it is fighting to protect all three. This isn't just another story about factories closing. It is a test of identity for a country that believes cooperation is stronger than coercion. What's unfolding is not a story of defeat, but a story of a nation rediscovering its strength when the world tests it most. And that fight is being led by Prime Minister Mark Carney and Industry Minister Mélanie Joly, who are turning national frustration into action.
Obviously tough news this morning for the workers in Ingersoll for GM. I had a conversation with the Canadian CEO of GM this morning. I had a conversation with the head of Unifor, who represents the employees, and a conversation with Doug Ford and Vic Fideli, his Minister of Economic Development. So we've decided altogether that we would be creating a new response group because we need to make sure that we fight for these jobs.
When the news broke from GM, their action inside Ottawa was immediate. Industry Minister Mélanie Joly held early morning calls with the CEO of GM Canada, the president of the Unifor Labour Union, and Ontario leaders Doug Ford and Vic Fideli. By midday, the federal and provincial governments had agreed to create a new response group aimed at bringing a new vehicle model to Ingelow. It was a coordinated effort to assure workers that their government wasn't walking away. The same team is also reviewing the Stellantis file after the company's decision to shift 3,000 jobs to the U.S. left Beampton reeling. Joly told reporters that every contract signed with Stellantis includes clear job and investment obligations. Ottawa and Queen's Park, he said, will hold the company accountable for every commitment linked to federal and provincial support. Carney's approach has been calm but firm. His government is refusing to rush into any deal with Washington simply to show progress before next month's APEC summit in South Korea. As Carney explained earlier this week, Canada will not set artificial deadlines or sign a deal that isn't in the best interest of Canadian workers. The government is balancing patience with resolve, making it clear that protecting Canada's long-term industrial strength comes before any short-term political win. Meanwhile, Joly's tone has reflected growing frustration across the country. In public appearances, she has spoken of standing up to corporate pressure and defending the dignity of Canadian labor. Her language resonates with a population that feels it has given enough in tax breaks, in loyalty, in good faith, only to see multinational companies pack up for political reasons south of the border. This is not just a response to one bad week. It's the beginning of a broader shift in how Canada defends its industries and its people. Behind these corporate decisions lies the ripple effect of Washington's economic nationalism. Since early 2025, the Trump administration has reintroduced sweeping import duties ranging from 10 to 100% on a range of goods, including vehicles and auto parts from Canada. The White House argues that these measures will bring jobs home. In practice, they have pushed automakers to relocate operations not for efficiency, but to avoid new tariffs. It's a strategy that may play well politically, but it is backfiring economically. Instead of strengthening North America, it's fragmenting it. Supply chains that once flowed smoothly between Windsor, Detroit, and Beampton are now tangled in red tape and uncertainty. The impact is not confined to Canada. American part suppliers, shipping firms, and dealerships are also feeling the squeeze. Analysts at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned in September that ongoing tariffs are raising consumer costs and disrupting production schedules across the continent. Facing this pressure, Canada has chosen a different path. Rather than retaliate, it is diversifying. Carney's government has intensified outreach across Asia, finalizing a trade deal with Indonesia, engaging with multiple APEC members, and reopening channels with China. Ottawa's message is clear. If Washington turns inward, Canada will not wait idly by. Ironically, Trump's effort to dominate the North American market is pushing his closest ally to look elsewhere. The attempt to make America stronger is instead driving its most trusted partner to build new alliances and new independence. On the streets of Ontario, the news from GM and Stellantis has felt personal. Families who built their lives around factory shifts and weekend hockey now face uncertainty. Yet amid the anxiety, a new mood is taking shape, one defined less by despair and more by pride. In towns like Ingersoll and Beampton, local groups have launched by Canadian campaigns. Community leaders are urging citizens to support domestic suppliers and small manufacturers. Workers who once competed across assembly lines are now united by a single goal: keeping Canada's industry alive. This collective determination mirrors the government's tone. When Carney and Joly speak of fighting for Canadian jobs, they are tapping into something deeper than politics. They are channeling a form of quiet patriotism that values self-reliance without arrogance. Canada's strength has never come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing firm when others waver. Trump's rhetoric often fuels confrontation. Canada's answer is persistence. Where Washington pushes with threats, Ottawa counters with endurance and partnership. The message is simple. They can move factories, but they can't move Canada's resolve. The challenge now is to turn that resolve into a blueprint, one that ensures workers in Ontario, Quebec, and across the prairies can see a future in the industries that once defined them. The fight over GM and Stellantis is not only about 2 plants or 4,000 jobs. It's about the principle that smaller nations have the right to defend their economic sovereignty in a global system that often favors power over fairness. Trump's trade policies may have won him a few symbolic victories and headlines, but they are isolating the United States at a critical time. By weaponizing tariffs, Washington is undermining the trust that made North America an integrated economic force for decades. That trust cannot be rebuilt through threats, only through cooperation. Canada, meanwhile, is quietly proving that resilience can be a strategy. By standing its ground, holding corporations accountable, and pursuing new trade opportunities, it is showing that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it works patiently, methodically, and with purpose. Carney and Joly's defiance is not just political theater. It is a statement of national identity that Canada will not be reduced to a bargaining chip in someone else's economic war. As the dust settles, one truth stands out. In the siege of tariffs and turmoil, Canada's greatest export may not be cars or minerals, but resilience. The quiet confidence to stand tall when others choose to shout.
President Trump wants to come after the jobs and create uncertainty, not only in Canada, but across the world.
And we're going to begin in Washington, where Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading for yet another high-stakes meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, a critical moment as Canada is seeking tariff relief.
The days before one of the year's most-anticipated meetings, the mood in Washington feels tense. Prime Minister Mark Carney is preparing to meet U.S. President Donald Trump on October 7th, his second trip to the White House since taking office. Back home, critics demand results. In Ottawa, his team chooses every word carefully. But before Carney even boards his flight, the story shifts. In Quebec City, at the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers Conference, several American governors from Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania speak out against the tariffs, straining relations between their country and Canada. They remind everyone that more than 55 million jobs depend on the cross-border economy. These are not foreign observers. They are Trump's own partners, warning that his trade policies are hurting their communities. For years, Trump has described tariffs as proof of strength. Now those same policies are drawing resistance from inside America. What was meant to pressure Canada is starting to pressure Washington itself. As Carney prepares for the meeting, he carries with him the unexpected support of U.S. governors who have publicly stood with Canada.
We are friends. We are allies.
Canada got some support from a delegation of governors from Great Lakes states, all of which are closely tied to the Canadian economy.
What is not helpful is the way in which the president has demeaned our neighbors in the north, suggesting that they should be the 51st state. I respect Canadian sovereignty.
The reason is simple economics. The Great Lakes region is one of the most integrated industrial corridors in the world. The auto industry, steel producers, and aluminum smelters on both sides of the border operate as a single system. When tariffs slice through that network, they don't separate rivals from friends. They break the same machine both depend on. In automobiles, for example, a single North American car crosses the border several times before reaching the showroom. Parts made in Windsor often travel to Detroit for assembly and return to Ontario for finishing. Each tariff on metals or components adds cost at every crossing. For factories in Michigan and Ohio, that means higher prices and slower schedules. The metals that feed those plants tell the same story. Canada supplies roughly 90% of the primary aluminum imported by the United States, most used in cars and aircraft. Steel from Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie becomes the raw material for mills in Illinois and Pennsylvania. When Washington taxes those imports at 25 to 50%, U.S. manufacturers pay more for materials they cannot source domestically. Energy links reinforce the dependency. Pipelines and power lines cross the border daily, keeping refineries and auto plants running. Ontario and Quebec rely on U.S. natural gas, while American states rely on Canadian electricity and oil. The supply chain moves in both directions. That is why the governors of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York are alarmed. Every new tariff threatens thousands of local jobs from assembly lines in Detroit to ports along Lake Superior. Even brief disruptions ripple through transport and retail. By defending Canada, these governors are protecting their own voters. They know that punishing Canada means punishing themselves. Their message is practical. Keep the border open or risk breaking an economy that sustains both nations. For Carney, that shared interest transforms his trip. He represents not only Canada, but an industrial region stretching from Ontario's Ottawa to Ohio's steel towns. Out of that conference emerges a quiet but powerful alliance. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford and Quebec's Premier Francis Legault stand with their U.S. counterparts, Tostrous cooperation over confrontation. For decades, the Great Lakes region has functioned as one economy. Cars assembled in Detroit rely on parts from Windsor. Aluminum from Quebec feeds aerospace plants in New York. This regional unity gives Carney an advantage ahead of his meeting. He can present himself not as a foreign petitioner, but as a partner speaking for a shared industrial base. The governor's support offers political cover and moral leverage in Washington. Across the Midwest, workers and business owners are realizing that their prosperity depends on the same open border that Trump's tariffs are closing. In Washington, Carney's team is finalizing briefing notes for the October 7th meeting. According to CBC News and Radio Canada, the main goal is partial relief on steel tariffs and a framework for future reductions. Officials are careful not to raise expectations. Trump's unpredictability is well known in Ottawa. The White House is also under pressure from a partial government shutdown and business groups warning of higher costs. Within that environment, Carney will argue that Canada is a trusted ally whose industries are vital to U.S. growth and security. His leverage comes from three fronts. First, critical minerals. Canada supplies nickel, cobalt, and lithium, all listed by the U.S. Department of Defense as strategic. Second, defense spending. Carney's plan to expand Canada's military budget by tens of billions could translate into contracts for U.S. suppliers if trade tensions ease. Third, political support from U.S. governors urging tariff relief. Trump still holds the power to adjust or keep duties under Section 232, but rising frustration from border states makes a limited compromise possible. Analysts expect any early progress to center on aluminum, where U.S. factories rely heavily on Canadian imports. Lumber tied to domestic politics will likely remain unchanged. As the meeting nears, the real question is not whether Carney secures everything he wants, but whether Trump can afford to keep everything he has. Whatever happens on October 7th, the political landscape in North America has already shifted. Trump's tariffs, once seen as a display of power, are now testing his own coalition. The Governors' Conference in Quebec City was a warning that economic pain does not stop at the border. In a region so integrated, punishing a neighbor often means punishing yourself. For Canada, this week is a moment to prove that patience and strategy can outlast bluster. Carney is entering the talks with a clear message that Canada's strength lies not only in its resources, but in its relationships with workers, businesses, and now with American leaders who see their futures linked to its success. The tariff war of 2025 has no victors yet, but the debate has changed. When American governors stand beside Canadian premiers to defend a shared economy, it signals a new kind of politics, one that recognizes the real battle is not between nations, but between cooperation and self-inflicted harm. As the White House meeting draws near, both countries wait. For Trump, the choice is whether to double down or step back. For Carney, the test is whether he can turn growing American frustration into meaningful relief. And for millions of workers across the Great Lakes, the stakes could not be clearer. Their jobs and the future of North America's economy now depend on what happens next in Washington.